I call on the fourth elected member for West Bay to lead us in prayers.
Let us pray. Almighty God, from whom all wisdom and power are derived, we beseech thee so to direct and prosper the deliberations of the Legislative Assembly now assembled, that all things may be ordered upon the best and surest foundations for the glory of thy name and for the safety, honor, and welfare of the people of these islands. Bless our sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth II, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Especially we pray for the Governor of our islands, Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, official members and ministers of Cabinet, and members of the Legislative Assembly, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for thy great name's sake. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, the Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon us and give us peace, now and always. Amen.
Proceedings of this Honorable House is now resumed. Please be seated.
Reading by the Honorable Speaker, messages and announcements.
I have apologies for the Honorable Speaker, the Honorable Attorney General, and the Leader of the Opposition.
Statements by honourable members and ministers of the Cabinet.
I have no notice of statements.
Government business, bills, second reading, the appropriation July 2014 to June 2015, Bill 2014. Continuation of debate on the budget address and a throne speech together with the government's policy statement.
The appropriation July 2014 to June 2015 bill. The debate continues thereon. Is there any other one who wishes to speak? Is there any other one who wishes to speak? I call on the fourth elected member of Bordentown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to give my contribution to this debate. And before I zone in on the actual topic at hand, I'd just like to reflect a little bit on this past year in office for me, which has been extremely eventful. I'm still extremely pleased and humble to have been chosen to represent the people of Bordentown and these three islands. And as I said, it has been a very humbling experience, but I am always grateful for the opportunity to represent the people of Bordentown. And I think there can be no greater reward than what I have experienced this past year. I know that they say our job at times is thankless, but I certainly didn't choose this job for thanks. I did it because I thought that I could make a difference and contribute to the development of this country. And I think all of my colleagues share that sentiment and that ambition. And I think I have chosen well when I decided to join the Progressives and work with them, work with the Progressive-led government to better this country. Mr. Speaker, I think we should all be congratulated for deciding to serve our country. And I know that we all have sacrificed in some way, shape, or form. I've heard comments being made, Mr. Speaker, in the public about some of us who were not worthy of being in this house, this honorable house, because of our backgrounds or what was referred to some of the high salaries that some of us used to make before we became representatives. And Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to say a few words about that because to me it is reminiscent of an attitude that actually held this country back for many years. And what surprises me is that I'm hearing these comments being made in the public by individuals who are not from these islands and who are representing certain individuals who are, or claim to represent some of us. And that really disturbs me. I call it the plantation syndrome, Mr. Speaker. And I hope that we can work together to eradicate that sort of behavior because it is despicable. And I think that individuals who decide to pick on individuals in here because they may have made a good living and may have been successful at some time or another in their life and decided to sacrifice, and I say sacrifice, and put aside their personal goals to come in here and serve the people of this country. I think it's an embarrassment for anyone, any Caymanian or any foreigner, to point at any member of this house and accuse them of being not worthy of being in here. No, my colleague from Bordentown made a comment the other day that I have chosen to respect. I'm not going to get into too much of the name calling and the backbiting and the last lick. I am here to represent the people of Bordentown, and I have a manifesto that I have signed my name to, and I have promises that I've made, and I am committed to doing that. So, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to make a few comments about that, but I hope that no one in here subscribes to that sort of behavior because we all come from diverse backgrounds and we all have something to contribute, and we all are respectable Caymanians who have chosen to serve our people, and we need to get away from that sort of mentality. But I'll move on. I don't want to dwell on that and give it too much importance, Mr. Speaker. I know my colleague from East End will deal with them. Mr. Speaker, Bordentown, being a representative in Bordentown, I have had the privilege of spending, along with yourself, a lot of time in the district because our other two colleagues have been busy, obviously, as ministers, new ministers, and I, as counselor for the Minister for Health, I understand the workload that they've taken on, and I do not envy them, to say the least. But in Bordentown, we have actually made a fair bit of progress. It's only been a year, and I'm not making excuses, Mr. Speaker, but we have done some work in the district, and there's a lot more to come. But just to highlight some of the important things that we've done, for me as Councillor for Sport, I thought it would be one of my first undertakings would be to promote the sport of boxing in Bordentown. And we have actually started the boxing program at the Civic Center with a lot of success. I think at the last count there were about 15 young men who would otherwise be loitering on the streets or looking for something to do have now taken their place in that boxing program. And they're not only learning the art of boxing, but they're also learning a discipline. They're being taught quite a bit by Coach Dooney there, and I've went by on a few occasions to visit and observe, and that program has taken off and taken root. And I'm extremely proud to have been a part of that. The minister has also made sure that the Savannah playing field is now open to the public. It is fenced and lit, and I'm proud to say that again, Ministry of Sports went the extra mile to get that done, and also all the other agencies, including Minister Tibbett's ministry, who assisted quite a bit. The cemetery expansion in Bordentown is also completed, and I know that during the campaign there was a lot of concern about that because we didn't have enough cemetery space in Bordentown. That has been addressed. People will criticize and say that we spent too much on that project, but it was a plan that was started. We found it in place, and we finished it. Cox Lumber will be opening their doors in September. That's another project that has started and been completed in the district. And just to touch back on the cemetery, that has a lot of room for expansion. So our needs in that area will be covered for quite some time. Not that we anticipate or would hope that we would need it. In Bordentown, just as a matter of interest, and just to show how much the district has picked up in the past year, since January alone, there have been 62 total building permits approved in the district. Of those, 2 are apartment buildings, 3 are commercial, 43 are residential, and there's a category called other, which I assume are just other types of buildings, and there's 14 of those, but 62 permits have been approved since January. This doesn't include what was already approved and being worked on prior to January. So this is a sign that things are picking up in the district, and I am pleased to acknowledge that a lot of this is due to this government's efforts to encourage entrepreneurship, to encourage job creation, and this is fair evidence that it's working and the government policies are working. The affordable housing applications are currently being assessed in Bordentown, and those houses will start to be assigned hopefully by the end of June. I know there have been some delays, but these are now being sorted out by the new chairman of the board, and I'm confident that now, and I've had a lot of calls, people inquiring whether or not we're moving ahead. We are determined to move ahead, and I think we've pretty much conquered all the issues that have come up. I'm extremely proud to announce that we have opened the PPM office officially. The office was functioning for quite some time prior to the official opening, but we had the official opening a few weeks ago, and we are now operating from 9 to 5 on the weekdays, and of course all 4 representatives are available by appointment. This is the Bordentown MLA office I'm speaking of. Overall, I think Caymanian unemployment has reduced. We've seen the results. And the economic activity in the Eastern District has picked up, and things are definitely taking a positive turn in a short year. But we are not out of the woods yet, Mr. Speaker. There's still a lot left to be done, and I'm by no means announcing that we are finished and we've accomplished what we came here to do. One of the issues that has plagued my mind is unemployment, and I don't think that's any secret. I know amongst my colleagues it's no secret. I think we discussed this issue at every caucus meeting. But I did go out on my own, along with the PPM office, the MLA office in Bordentown, to create a job drive because I was aware of the growing frustrations of many Caymanians who are saying to me that they're not able to get work. And in launching this job drive, one thing became abundantly clear to me, Mr. Speaker, and that is that we still had a lot of work to do in the area of Caymanians competing with cheap labor. Caymanians not being equipped to join the workforce, Caymanians not being workforce ready. And I'll speak to this a little bit later on in my address when I cover the NWDA and my role there. But there is, Mr. Speaker, an abundance of cheap labor that has created an imbalance in the workforce. And I'm careful how I say this because we're not trying to come across, Mr. Speaker, as anti-business or wanting to discourage businesses to improve their bottom lines. But there has been an impact on the Caymanian workforce. And many companies are, because of the economic conditions now, unable to dedicate as many resources as they can to training Caymanians and preparing Caymanians, as these things cost money and many businesses are suffering, and hence you see the government bringing some concessions and incentives for small businesses, because we are aware of the hurt and how this affects not just the business but the employees. This problem didn't begin yesterday either, Mr. Speaker. It goes way back to when, we created financial and tourism industries during what I would consider the boom years, when we were in a pioneer spirit and people were coming here to invest. The global economy was good and growing. And it was easy then to overlook the future needs of the Caymanian workforce. I think one of my concerns is that we need to now step back for a second and relook at how we're dealing with Caymanians in the workforce and ensure that the policies and the steps we put in place now guarantee Caymanians a place in existing and future industries. We have matured considerably, and it's now up to us to ensure that we continue to push for Caymanians to take their rightful place, but not just push them out there and leave them on their own, but support them, develop them, educate them. The last thing we want is for Caymanians to go out and fail. I was looking at a news story on Cayman 27 of a young Caymanian lady who is working for the Ritz and is now taking a management position overseas in Canada. She started off washing dishes. She's just one example of what can happen, what a motivated Caymanian can do with support. Oh yeah, she's now moving to Canada to take up a management position with the Ritz. And Councillor Hugh will discuss that later on as well. Mr. Speaker, I believe that the neglect of Caymanians in the workforce and not giving them the opportunities is now showing up in our court system and on the streets and in some of our homes. And we have to collectively take steps to curb this behavior, or we will face greater consequences. I've come across two recent examples, Mr. Speaker, of employment agencies who, in my opinion, misrepresented certain facts to immigration in order to obtain work permits. This government has put in place a severe penalty, a stiff fine for that offense. And I'm imploring and I'm begging the immigration authorities to be vigilant, look into these things when they're reported, assess the fine if necessary, but make sure that we get the result that the immigration changes were intended to derive, which is to get people to straighten up and fly right. We cannot have these sorts of incidents occurring because it's leading and it's continuing to allow people to buy into this thing that the government doesn't look out for its people, it looks out for the foreigners, which is completely absurd. But when examples like this come up, we have to put our foot down and stamp them out immediately. Another example, I've heard a lot of complaints about people telling Caymanians that jobs are being advertised simply to renew a work permit. I think the businesses need to be informed that this is illegal. You cannot tell a Caymanian that you're not going to hire them because you're renewing a work permit. Again, let's just start. There are a few examples. Not all employers are doing this. There are a few bad apples. We need to deal with those. Mr. Speaker, I work with the NWDA during my job drive to assist individuals in getting placed in jobs. And I did this because at the time I was working with the NWDA as chairman of the task force created by the minister. And I wanted to prove that the NWDA could actually work. And I believed in it. And I've had quite a bit of success in getting Caymanians out for interviews, getting them involved in further training in cases where they were not quite prepared to join the workforce. And I'll continue to do that. I am not getting the success that I'd hoped initially, but changes have been occurring in the NWDA as the year went on. And I'm happy to say that the situation there now is vastly improved compared to when we started a year ago. I still believe, Mr. Speaker, that in Bordentown we need to create, reminiscent to the Go East initiative, an economic stimulus package strictly for the Eastern districts, because I think the Eastern districts do have some unique needs that we can't really compare to Georgetown and West Bay and so on. But we do need to focus a bit more on economic stimulus in the Eastern districts, and that's my job. I will be making some recommendations to caucus going forward. We also have had some improvement in the level of policing in the district, but I do feel that we could do a bit more, and I'm extremely concerned, and I'm not throwing this on the feet of the government, obviously, Mr. Speaker, because we've only had a year to deal with these issues, but I'm highlighting them now so that the public is aware that we are looking at them, and I will be looking at them. But emergency services in Bordentown need to be improved as well. I'm particularly concerned with the schools, Bordentown Primary School, who currently do not have a nurse, and I'll be discussing that with the minister to see what we can do to remedy that. But in cases where kids become injured, there are no emergency services in the vicinity that can come and assist, and that to me is a bit concerning. It's a problem we inherited, but we will deal with it, Mr. Speaker. Looking ahead for the district, I would like to push for the creation of a district committee. We do have a committee that works closely with us, but I want to expand that, Mr. Speaker, into the entire district. What I would like to see is representation from every single area of Bordentown so that we can start to encourage a greater level of participatory democracy among Bordentowners. And the way to accomplish this, I think, is through working with a central committee that has been empowered to do certain things on our behalf and work with us as a team. I'd like to have very soon, after this budget session, a series of public meetings. We're not quite sure in what format yet, but we will decide that in the upcoming weeks and make announcements on when we will be actually meeting with the public to discuss our first year in office and also continue to solicit feedback and encourage the Bordentowners to meet with us and tell us what their concerns are. Bordentown has 4 representatives in the government, and there's no excuse, as the Premier said, for us not being available to our constituents. And I applaud him for saying that because he reminded me of how important my job is. I know some people criticize him for putting us on the spot at the office opening, Mr. Speaker, but I didn't take it as criticism. I took it as strong encouragement, and from my Premier, and his words Didn't just go in one ear and come out the next. I also want to, along with my colleagues, continue to work on improving the Heritage Park. We know that there's an issue there with parking during occasions when we have a lot of people at the park. We recently had Mayfest Day, which was hugely successful despite the rain, but parking is an ongoing concern, and we are looking at ways to alleviate that. And I know Minister Bodden has taken that one on wholeheartedly, and he's determined to get it resolved, and I know it will be resolved. Cumber Avenue, I do have a concern in there with the flooding and the hurricane threat. We've seen issues in there with flooding, and I think during Hurricane Ivan, Cumber Avenue actually was cut off from the main road. There is a possibility of creating a back access from Anton Bodden, discussing that with the Minister for Roads, and we will put forward solutions for that as well. That issue was raised to me by a number of Cumber Avenue residents, and I haven't forgotten it. Mr. Speaker, I've also worked closely with the community team in Belford to create the beginnings of a public park. We've taken their concerns on board and relayed those to the minister as well, in terms of road, flooding, and flood control and so forth. And we are working on solutions for those. But I wanted to highlight what has been done in Belford, because I think it's something that we can use as an example for other communities in Bordentown. They've created a working committee that deals with their local community issues. And I must applaud them for doing that. Some of them have even gone as far as becoming first aid certified, so that during times of hurricane impact or any other natural disaster, or any disaster for that matter, they are able to respond and assist the people within their community. And I want to use that as a model for other Bordentown communities and build on it, because it is commendable what they've done, and it's all done on a voluntary basis, even down to the organizing of a Christmas party for kids, which I attended. I think we all attended this December. But I didn't want to miss the opportunity to highlight what they've done. They've created a connected, safe community. And the Minister Bodden and I were down there a few weeks ago. It was a sad occasion because it was a death, but we spent several hours in the community. And you can see the level of closeness, the level of harmony, everyone working together, living together. And, you know, these community groups do more than just come out and respond to hurricane threats. You know, the community is close-knit. Everyone is looking after each other, and I must commend them for that. We're also working with a similar group in North Sound Gardens, Mr. Speaker, and they've presented a number of initiatives, and again, they're a fine, shining example of a community group that works well together and takes care of their community. And again, these two groups, I think, will be the template for other groups that we hope to inspire moving forward. On a down note, the kiosks on Cowood Beach are still not operational, Mr. Speaker. And while I'll refrain from beating up too much on the individuals involved at the civil service level, I am pleading with the minister now to make sure that he puts his foot down. I know he will. It's been a year now, and we need to get those things sorted out. It was a mess handed to us by the previous administration, but I don't want to use that as an excuse. And 3 years from now, I don't want to be standing here telling people that we couldn't get it done. It just needs to be done. Mr. Speaker, I've also made a commitment to have a regular attendance at primary schools, PTA meetings in the Bordentown district. And I kicked this off by attending one at the Bordentown Primary School. And I have gathered a ongoing list of issues that need to be addressed by the government. And I will be asking the minister and her ear for a short time just to go through these. And I can assure the parents of Bordentown primary students that we are on top of these issues and working on them. Obviously, the budgetary constraints that we are dealing with make it difficult to do everything at once, but we'll prioritize, and I'll work with the minister and councillor to make sure that we address those. I'm also aware that the library in Barton Town needs some work as well, and it's an area that I'm familiar with computers and IT equipment, so I will also discuss those with the minister. I'm pleased to see that the minister has launched his road upgrade program, and once I think this budget is approved, we will see more road work happening in the district. And I just wanted to publicly thank the minister for giving us that attention, because some of the roads in Barton Town were in urgent need of repair. And we continue to hold discussions with various developers in the district, encouraging their projects to take root and encouraging them to continue to invest in the district. And one in particular in Beach Bay has my full support. We actually saw something which is you don't see every day, but the developer decided that he would create some jobs to help us with the unemployment situation, just on a temporary basis. But he was very gracious in creating some jobs that could have been done with heavy equipment. He decided no, he would turn them over to the unemployed people in Barton Town, and for a few weeks there was some work going on there, and people were benefiting from getting a little cash in their pocket. We'll continue to work with people like that to make sure that when there are opportunities for our people, that they receive them. May have been one or two hiccups with that, but that was just phase one, and on an ongoing basis, the developer will work a lot closer with us to ensure that everything runs smoothly. I've also committed to launching a district newsletter that I will share with my colleagues and ensure that they participate in adding to the content. But I think this is another way of keeping in touch with our constituents and letting them know what the government is doing. Because there are times when we're extremely busy and we may not have the opportunity to communicate with everyone. I know everyone jokes that I miss the Facebook, but coming from an IT background, I can't help it. I like to communicate with people electronically, so I'll try to push that initiative. We've managed to get the Minister of Finance using, I think, BBM. Is he on it now? So I think we can accomplish a lot more electronically. And also, obviously, the Shady Hospital and the upcoming Gulf and Community project will enhance the economic condition of the Eastern Districts, and I'm pleased to have supported both of those initiatives. During the campaign, we talked about the Peace Initiative, and that is something that I want to put on the agenda now for this year. My colleagues, and I think it was Minister Panton, actually came up with that acronym, and it was quite fitting. It's a program of incentives for Eastern community entrepreneurs, and we will see how we can tie that into some of the things that he's doing in his ministry, especially with a focus on small businesses and creating new opportunities for entrepreneurs. Mr. Speaker, this budget contains a number of incentives that are designed to bring a high level of economic relief to the country, but obviously we can't do it all at once. We have to take baby steps because we are constrained in what we can do, not just because of the economy, but because of the FFR requirements and so forth. If we could do more, we would do it, Mr. Speaker. I know that. These incentives were geared towards increasing the amount of disposable income in the hands of consumers. And when you look at things like reducing duty for businesses, reducing business license fees and spreading out the payments of those fees over time, and reducing ultimately the cost of electricity, it's clear what the government's intention is. We are not going to continue the regime of taxing just to meet our fiscal demands. and we are prepared to take the risks, take the licks sometimes, take the extra stress of trying to balance a budget with reduced revenues, which is not easy to do, in the hopes that what we do will be reflected in the short term and medium term in the economy by creating enhanced positive cash flows throughout the country. This is not a new economic theory. This is nothing new. But we have decided to take on that burden because it then falls back on the government to find ways to work with a reduced revenue stream. But we feel that the dividends will be paid off in the near future. And so we are willing to do this for the people of this country. It bothers me when I hear people start to criticize us to say we're not doing enough because they know what the financial situation is and they know better. But you live and you learn. Everyone knows that government revenue is based on consumption, not direct taxes. And the more that we can encourage people to spend, the more we can encourage people to do in the economy on their own, as private individuals or businesses, the more the government will benefit. And that is the strategy that we are employing here. Government is limited in what measures we can use to stimulate the economy and what we can do to encourage economic growth. We can't spend, which is something that a government with lots of resources can do to stimulate the economy. And increasing the population overnight, to me, Mr. Speaker, is not really a feasible solution at this time. And I said I won't get into pointing fingers or blaming, but I think this story has to be told. I was a member of United Democratic Party at the time, so I think I'm qualified in knowing what I'm talking about. But when the status grants were done, I think it was done in a way that both existing Caymanians and the new Caymanians suffered. And I say that because the new Caymanians were not here long enough to integrate properly into our society. There were some who deservedly got status. I agree with that. But there were those who were newly arrived, hadn't really learned the Caymanian culture, the Caymanian way of life, and we did them the disservice of throwing them into our community, our communities, and expected them to just continue life as if, hey, they've always been a Caymanian. We've created, by doing this, Mr. Speaker, two societies that were not fully meshed together and working together. And it's created some conflict and some strife, some social issues. And it has increased certain burdens on both cultures. And I have seen for myself, being the product of a Jamaican and Caymanian marriage, that there is some animosity between our young people. And we cannot continue with those sorts of actions. I've seen even where I think it has encouraged the development of gangs, where you have two cultures clashing, all because we didn't take the time to figure out how to properly integrate people before we just threw them into becoming Caymanians. And I'm not in any way, shape, or form speaking ill of those who receive status. If I was one of them, I would have accepted it too. And I would have been extremely grateful. But existing Caymanians suddenly found that overnight we received, as a benefit of the status grants, competition for jobs that our people were hoping to receive or competing for amongst each other. And now that added strata of the population we actually had more competition for entry-level jobs. When you increase the population of a country, Mr. Speaker, you don't bring in people who will compete with your people. You bring in people who have skills that are not found within the country. So if it had been managed properly, but it wasn't, I think I call it a social experiment gone bad. Society was not prepared to deal with that sudden population increase and the strain on the resources of this country. And we have done both groups of people a disservice. And when I hear the leader of the opposition talk about increasing the population, I hope that that is not what he has in mind, because we've seen the ill effects of it. So much so that I believe the individuals who are involved have seen the ill effects of it and voted for this government, despite people saying that we were anti-expat and anti-Jamaican and anti-foreigner. They saw through it. They realized what was going on. Mr. Speaker, I believe that population growth comes naturally with proper economic and social planning and strategic thinking. The strain on our schools and on social services and on the health services, on the police, was not given any consideration when the UDP did the status grants. And it was the primary reason why I decided that I could not continue with that group, because I saw the short-sightedness. And I'll stop short of saying anything further on that, because I don't want to start accusing individuals of being selfish or buying votes or using it to secure votes. But I find it ironic that the people who were being manipulated during that time of our history have decided to support this government, and I am humbled to have seen that. This government has a plan, Mr. Speaker, for everyone, not just one group. And, you know, when I think back to the individuals who came here and helped us to develop this country, the people who I call the true nation builders, those are the type of individuals that we want to encourage to live and work and become Caymanian, live and work amongst us. And that is where I think we have to focus our strategies. Suddenly giving hundreds of people the right to citizenship without planning for them is not the answer. And it will only create more burdens on this economy and on this government. And I think this government recognizes that. We don't want to bring people here and to give them more drastic consequences of living than they were experiencing in their own countries. Things like putting a gender equality policy in place. Things like that have to be done before you go and suddenly increase your population. Putting a conservation law in place. Dealing with your immigration issues, the weaknesses in the immigration law. Looking at minimum wage. All of those things have to be done prior to a sudden increase in population, or we'll multiply the problems to a point where we cannot deal with them. So let's focus on fixing the issues that are impacting the existing population and Caymanians before looking to inflate and compound the problems. The population increase will come in time if we get things right. Mr. Speaker, I mentioned the minimum wage a short time ago, and I wholeheartedly support the implementation of a minimum wage. I saw recently that, I can't remember which U.S. state it was, but a U.S. state just recently moved their minimum wage to $14 per hour. We have a long way to go, but again, I'm comfortable to know with the minister's policy and what she's doing in terms of trying to determine where we go with the minimum wage. I do believe that its implementation will stem the development of the cheap labor market I referred to earlier and stop the the competition with our young people and our semi-skilled people for entry-level jobs. I think it will open up a lot of entry-level jobs to Caymanians who at the present time are unemployed and unable to survive on the wages that are being offered. I think it will also do quite a bit for our reputation as a gem of the Caribbean, that we do not encourage the exploitation of labor, whether foreign or domestic, and ensures that we will be looking after the needs of all employees, Caymanian and otherwise. I mentioned one man, one vote, Mr. Speaker, and I take note that a lot was said about the recent vote in the House. Just to set the record straight, I am still working with the progressive-led government to determine the best way forward, and I still support one person, one vote. I still believe it's the purest form of democracy. But I recognize that there are those among us who have joined us who may have had slightly differing views and opinions, and I respect the fact that we need to, as a government, take the time to get this right. And so I am willing to wait for the debate to finish internally before we come forward with our position, but I will be, as my colleagues know, pushing every step of the way for the reform. Mr. Speaker, our government has chosen to stimulate our economy via a program of incentives. The government believes that the more cash we have circulating in the economy, the more economic growth we will experience, and I believe this as well. As a student of economics, during the time that I was working on my MBA, it's common sense for me. We have to understand that the government alone cannot create economic opportunities, but we have a mandate to try and do that as much as possible. And we want to encourage entrepreneurship. We want to encourage the development of new industries and new businesses. And that's why our policies are geared towards lightening the load on businesses so that they're able to employ Caymanians and survive from an economic point of view. And as I said earlier, as the economic growth progresses, so too will the opportunities for Caymanians and opportunities to increase the population gradually. As the Minister of Finance quite rightly pointed out, we do not have the natural resources to attract a high level of skilled, experienced individuals who can perform the role of the nation builders of yesteryear. So we need to find creative ways to get the right individuals to come here to work alongside us. We have evolved beyond that phase of our history, and we have to change our strategies and adapt. We cannot keep doing the same old thing and expect different results. And so when I hear the leader of the opposition talking about increasing the population, I find it funny and ironic because the attempt that he made several years ago actually resulted in some of the conditions we experience here today. Given the nature of the economy and the limitations on government now, the most effective way to move forward is the way that this government has chosen. Mr. Speaker, I find it a bit concerning that there are those who still question what this budget does to assist poor people, the poor people of this country, as it should be abundantly clear what benefits these initiatives, these incentives will bring. But I guess that's part of politics, and I won't even get into arguing that point, but it is clear to me what we've done and what we've set out to achieve here. Mr. Speaker, I couldn't let this opportunity pass without talking about the civil service and the recent one-off payment that was made that is going to be made to civil servants. During the past year, I have worked closely with many civil servants at all levels of the civil service. And I have found that despite what people say, the majority of civil servants are hardworking, dedicated people who sometimes do very thankless jobs. They have suffered through the economic times along with the government, and they have experienced a diminishing purchasing power due to the rise of the cost of living without being able to get a salary increase. I know civil servants, Mr. Speaker, who take vacation days to concentrate on work that they have not been able to finish in the office. I don't think you find that too often in the private sector. And I am extremely pleased and proud to have been a part of the initiative to show our appreciation for the hard work and efforts of the civil servants. And next year, if there is an opportunity, I will support it again. But I just wanted to take a moment to highlight their contribution to this country. Mr. Speaker, moving on to more national issues, I have actually been given responsibility for e-government, and I work as the counselor for e-government. And under my direction, the government is going to be moving ahead with our e-government plans. This is yet another campaign promise that I am trying to fulfill. And the first step we are going to take is to actually move the e-government initiative from under the Ministry of Home Affairs and move it to the Cabinet Office, hopefully, once that receives Cabinet approval. The only reason for doing that, Mr. Speaker, is that I fear that it would become just an IT project. And what this is, the e-government project encompasses the entire government, and I thought the Cabinet Office would be the ideal place to steer it from. We are also moving ahead, as mentioned, with the recruitment of a director of e-government, and I have moved to create an operational framework from which to manage the implementation of e-government across the government. The Premier will continue to have responsibility for the initiative, and I will work under his direction as counselor and take on more of the day-to-day direction of the initiative. We will create a high-level steering committee that will take on the strategic and decision-making role of the project, and that high-level committee will actually be made up of individuals from the private sector, from government and different agencies. There will be a lower-level task force who is charged with implementing the initiatives, and the composition of that task force may change depending on the particular initiative that we're dealing with at the time, Mr. Speaker. And I think that is also a good way of involving individuals from across the civil service who actually may not have the opportunity to work on projects of this nature. For example, if there's a programmer or a business analyst working at the HSA, there may be opportunities to second them for short periods of time as we deal with different initiatives, give them a break from the monotony of their existing positions, give them something a little exciting to get their hands involved in from time to time. But I think it's a good opportunity for everyone across government to play a role in the development of e-government. As I said, the steering committee will have oversight and responsibility for all e-government initiatives. Ministries and departments and so on will have the autonomy to bring forward their initiatives based on their business plans. But we are putting together a framework that they will have to work from within. In order to save us some time and resources, I have asked the government to consider or take on board my professional opinion as an IT expert to to agree on certain assumptions that would have otherwise taken a lot of time and money to research. These things, from my point of view, are common sense and part of any successful IT implementation, but for the layman, it may not be quite so clear. Just to give you a quick overview of these, I'm asking Cabinet to agree that the initiatives will have a shared platform, that all work will be directed via the steering committee, that it makes use of open data and API technologies, that it is cloud-based, that we will expand on the use of already established solutions and platforms and not try to reinvent the wheel, that all data will remain within the jurisdiction. Where possible, that we will continue to use the already established model where providers engage in revenue sharing in order to pay for the development of the system and minimize the cost to government. That all initiatives need to be vetted by the steering committee. And that from a more global perspective, external licensed vendors and service providers for ICT will now be expected to develop and create solutions and products that support the creation of a digital society, giving particular priority to e-students and e-citizens. This is something that has to be done in partnership with other entities operating privately, but I think it is something that they will embrace. We obviously have a clear focus on consultation with the public and private sectors in order to get this initiative off the ground. And all consultation will be guided by the key players involved. There will also be, in response to the member from Northside's concerns, there will be a focus on business process improvement. We will not simply replicate what we have now. We will actually look at the existing processes, look at where we can improve them, and then seek to automate them. I think the example he gave was obtaining a gun license or doing a land transfer. In both of those scenarios, we will actually look to better the process before we automate it. There's no sense in automating a process that doesn't work. Again, I said, he's obviously looking at this from a layman's point of view. I'm looking at it based on the training and experience that I have, and his concerns are not going unheard, but we've already considered all of that. Cabinet will decide on this legislative budget, on legislation and budget, and other key components involved in the creation of the e-government initiative, based on the steering committee's guidance. And the task force will have the responsibility for implementing the project. And the projects will be broken down into discrete projects so that we don't try to tackle it all one time, and we attack the initiative through a process of division of labor and division of effort. This is a huge initiative, and it has to be managed properly. Looking ahead for e-government, I mentioned a year ago that I would like to steer the country towards the implementation of its first, what I call big data initiative, which would involve collaborative effort between private sector and government, and look to create an information system that can be used to forecast financial trends, trends involved in tourism, anything that basically impacts government revenue and the revenue of the companies who work with government or rely on government services. This can only be done by sharing information. And again, it's another partnership effort that I think can be done with minimal cost to the government, and with reliance on the private sector and the technology firms that exist within the Cayman Islands. So there'll be more on that as e-government takes off. But I think it would give us a competitive advantage over other jurisdictions. For example, if we knew at a glance what our occupancy levels were at all the hotels, where the majority of our visitors come from at a glance, without having to wait months for information to come back in reports and so on. We can respond to changes in the market almost immediately. We can craft marketing efforts based on real-time data, real-time information that's shared between everyone who participates in a particular industry, rather than waiting on information that's 6 months old. It gives us a huge competitive edge over other jurisdictions, and I think this is the direction we have to go in. It'll take some effort and some planning, but this is one of the marks I hope to leave. Sports tourism was already mentioned, Mr. Speaker. A number of times, but sports tourism continues to grow and improve. And there have been a number of notable events that have provided us with access to high-level international competition for locals and visitors alike. And it's mentioned on page 6 of the government's achievements. Some of the most notable events that have taken place are obviously the North Sea Beach Volleyball tournaments, the Cayman Invitational Track Meet, the Carifta Track Championships, CONCACAF Under-15 Boys Football, CONCACAF Under-20 Women's Tournament, and there's another CONCACAF tournament coming up very shortly as well. All of these events have received the full support of the government, and we hope to continue supporting them, and we will continue to support sports tourism and the development of sports tourism going forward. We have seen the importance to our economy, and not just that, but the development of local athletes and giving the local athletes the exposure that they deserve. I've already mentioned the expansion of the boxing program in Bordentown, and I have to mention one of our rising stars, Tafari Ebanks, who is preparing himself for a much higher level of competition now, and with hopes to moving on to the Olympics. And he is to be applauded for his efforts. I've seen the hard work and dedication he's put into his sport. And boxing is obviously one of my favorite sports. So I just wanted to mention Tafari and his efforts. He and I talk on a regular basis, and I'm extremely proud of him. Mr. Speaker, the NWDA Task Force, I've heard some criticisms of our efforts. I keep hearing mention of all these committees and task force that are not doing anything, but nothing could be further from the truth. The minister created a task force to look at issues with Caymanian unemployment and getting Caymanians secured positions in our workforce and making them workforce ready. I've actually come across a few examples where there's been breakdowns in the system and where we've had work permits refused because a Caymanian was identified, and then later on that decision was overturned and the permit granted. And on the surface it may seem like, again, another blatant case of discrimination against Caymanians, but we have to look a little bit deeper sometimes. I think it signifies a failure and a breakdown in the system. There's a conclusion you could make that the system favors the expat and foreign labor, But knowing some of the individuals involved in the system, I find it hard to believe that that could be the case. One thing that did happen is that the business was disadvantaged in waiting on a decision on the permit, whether you agree or disagree that they should have gotten a permit. But then you have to wonder, was the rejection of the Caymanian legitimate? And we have, I think, a much larger issue to deal with in that we have a mixed bag. We do have cases where Caymanians are discriminated against, but we also have cases where Caymanians are not workplace ready. And I'm not going to stand here and say that there's just blatant discrimination and no one gets an opportunity, because I've seen examples where Caymanians do get opportunities. But I do feel that the efforts made by the NWDA task force and the NWDA itself will actually go towards addressing both issues. Cabinet created the task force, and in order to ensure that the NWDA was positioned to meet the need of the stakeholders, the Minister of Labor asked me to chair the task force, and I gladly accepted. We met numerous times between September and January, and we worked alongside an internal review committee whose responsibility was to actually put forward recommendations aimed at improving the ability of the agency to carry out its duties. The review allowed the NWDA to re-engineer itself, and while we were actually meeting and discussing the areas of improvement under the direction of Dr. Tasha Garcia, the NWDA was in the background working on implementing the recommendations. So we didn't wait until the production of a final report to do anything. The work was ongoing as we were meeting and discussing. And there have been a number of notable improvements and changes made. I think one of the main ones is the creation of an immigration interface, which gives the Immigration Department visibility of Caymanians who are available for positions when work permit applications are made. In the past, this was not possible, and some permits were granted based on the Immigration Department not knowing, or the board not knowing who or if any Caymanians were available. A community outreach has been launched, and the NWDA now visits districts regularly to meet with individuals, get them registered, and available in their database, so that when discussions come up at immigration board meetings and immigration meetings, that they are now aware which Caymanians are out there and available. The task force also recommended the creation of national programs, such as the National Job Link Program and the National Training Program. And these two initiatives actually go some way towards addressing the issue of making Caymanians workplace ready. Caymanians are now, who are identified as lacking in one area or another, but just about ready to join the workforce or take up a position in the workforce, now actually have a means to getting those skills that they lack and getting the support from the government that they need to actually become productive employees. This initiative aligns Caymanians with the needs of the employers, and that is key. And also the creation of the Training and Development Program initiative actually was based on research and data provided by the local employers. So the NWDA has responded and actually created opportunities for our people to gain employment, and it's based on not just what we think, but what industries think. I've been using the NWDA to assist my constituents, as I said, with some success, and I know that as this initiative continues and grows, it will actually improve tremendously. And again, I also think that this is an opportunity to use the NWDA to stamp out cases of discrimination, to identify those who do discriminate and deal with them appropriately. We can't have the entire country suffer for a few bad apples, and I think this is one way of dealing with it. Mr. Speaker, I couldn't sit down without saying a few words about the FFR. It is, I think, overall, a positive thing for the country, in that it does force government to embrace medium-term planning, value for money, management of risk, and proper accountability. I do find it a bit ironic that there are members, or I wouldn't say members, I would say individuals in the public domain who do not necessarily support this government, saying that we should put that issue to a referendum and we should resist it. When it was something that this government didn't sign us into, and I think it would be a bit foolhardy to go and try to change it now. We have to work towards achieving the goals set by the FFR and get it off our backs as soon as possible. I do agree that it does stifle our ability to grow the economy, expand the economy, but you know, I think we need to take it for the positive that it brings, the discipline that it brings, and commit to meeting the requirements and getting it off our back so we can move forward as a government and a country. We actually did need some of that discipline based on recent events. I don't think any of us here enjoys being handcuffed, so to speak, but it is a necessary pain, and we will continue to soldier through it. But I just didn't want this government to be expected to carry that load on our shoulders as well. I've heard comments about it being the result of actions taken by this administration. You simply have to look at the signatures on the document to understand why that will become necessary. But I won't go ahead beating up on anyone or blaming anyone. We're here now, Mr. Speaker. We're a year in, and I think everyone, at least on this side, will agree that we have worked extremely hard through some very difficult circumstances, and we have worked well together. It wasn't always easy. We come from a range of diverse backgrounds. We are different individuals with different upbringings. Some of us even slightly culturally different, depending on our parentage. But we have pulled together, we have held it together, we have worked together. And I am proud of this government and the individuals. We have so many first-time representatives here, and I've seen an extreme commitment from everyone to get it right. I've seen everyone take personal sacrifices, put aside personal ambitions to do what is right and to support this country and its development. And I continue to believe in this government. I continue to support this government. And I know that we will get it right. As I said, it's only been 12 months. We have a lot of work to do. This is by no means a declaration that we're finished. This just means we're only just getting started. But I look forward to the next year ahead with my colleagues and working through the issues that this country faces. And I'm sure that next year the report will be just as positive, if not better. I have every confidence in the world that this government is the right government for this country at this time. Mr. Speaker, with your indulgence, I would just like to close my contribution by reading a short poem, and at the end, I think you will understand why I read it. It's called Still I Rise. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hopes springing high, still I rise. Do you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops weakened by my soulful cries? Does my hardiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard, 'cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meetings of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean, deeping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. I think that was fitting because it's a poem by Maya Angelou. May she rest in peace.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If not, acknowledge the Minister for the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to add my contribution to the debate so far on the throne speech, the Premier's policy statement, and the budget for the 2014-15 period. I would say first I congratulate Her Excellency on what I thought was a clear and concise throne speech. I agree with her view that policy issues are by and large the remit of the elected government as set out in the Constitution, and I think it is appropriate for these matters to be dealt with as detailed by the Premier. I congratulate both the Premier and my colleague, Minister Archer, on a job well done earlier and in relation to the budget and their contributions. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I congratulate all of my colleague ministers on the backbench of the government as well on a job well done. I think we're collectively judged by the performance or lack thereof, as the case may be on each such occasion. And I think on this occasion we can collectively share the credit for the outcome that we've had over the past financial year for financial performance of the government. I think we've all contributed very meaningfully, and of course these have all been detailed in the the progress report that the Honourable Premier tabled in this Honourable House yesterday. Some will say, Mr. Speaker, that self-praise is no praise, but certainly facts and figures don't lie. As an aside, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition said yesterday in his contribution that essentially our achievements are off the back of his work. Certainly in terms of continuity of government, there will always be some grain of truth there, but the harsh reality is that when he had his opportunity, he made a complete mess of it. And such was the view of the people of this country just over a year ago. In his contribution yesterday, he was singing that familiar song of his, that everything he did was good and for the benefit of the country, and he restored confidence in the country when he became Premier. Mr. Speaker, one could close one's eyes or one would have to, let me say, close one's eyes and speak from the most generous parts of our hearts to say that. He referred to the OECD blacklist as being indicative of some loss of trust for Cayman internationally. Mr. Speaker, I think everyone knows there wasn't a blacklist, there was something called a grey list, and it was based on an arbitrary number which the OECD mandated at the time of 12 tax information exchange agreements in order to be regarded as being in compliance. And Cayman at the time had only signed, I think, about 8 such agreements. A number were being negotiated at the time of the election. The interesting thing is that most of our competitors were on this grey list as well. So essentially there wasn't any loss of trust, but of course I am not going to belittle the efforts either of the Leader of the Opposition, Premier at the time, in getting the necessary agreements signed up to get us off this grey list. Mr. Speaker, this budget is collectively our budget. It's what we'll be judged on in a year's time. I think we can all be justly proud of what we've achieved, and we can be proud of the budget that we have submitted as our proposal. Hopefully it will be adopted by this House, this Honourable House. And this is more so the case, Mr. Speaker, against the backdrop of the expenditure cuts which we were mandated to achieve, some $25 million since coming to office. I'm confident, Mr. Speaker, that there is an excellent chance that we will be able to say the same thing this time next year. And I say that not because I want my colleagues and I to bask in any way, rather because I know that each of us are motivated by a deep-seated desire to see the best for our country and for our fellow Caymanians. So, Mr. Speaker, when I congratulate my colleagues on what I think is a job well done, it's really a statement of congratulations to our beloved Cayman Islands and its people. We're moving in a good direction. and I think we're picking up some speed. If we succeed in the job the people of this country, the voters of this country, our fellow Caymanians have entrusted us to do, then our country succeeds. And we have done our job. Mr. Speaker, in relation to the financial circumstances of the country, we promised upon taking office to stabilize the financial position. We have done that. We promised that after we'd done that, we would begin rolling back some of the enormous tax increases that had been put in place, which had driven up the cost of living and the cost of doing business very significantly. We are beginning to do that in this budget. We also promised that we would examine ways to support small businesses. We are also doing that in this budget, and we will continue to examine ways to do that. Mr. Speaker, we have a projected surplus which is some 8 million more than originally forecast for this year. I have no doubt that the policy decisions that we have taken to curtail unnecessary expenditure and the efforts we have made to restore trust and confidence in this country as a whole has significantly been responsible for that. One question that has demonstrated itself amongst much of the what I would regard as politically motivated criticism is, if we have 108 million surplus, why are we not giving more of it back to the people through, for example, duty cuts or some other form of rebates? The question is straightforward, and the answer is equally straightforward. That surplus pays for some capital work, pays down the principal and interest on government debt, and provides reserves to enable us to make progress in relation to meeting the PMFL requirements. Mr. Speaker, we agreed a plan with the UK to have this country in compliance with the financial yardsticks which have been set out in the Public Management and Finance Law, which incorporates, of course, the framework for fiscal responsibility, which the previous government was required to sign up to. This surplus helps us to stay on track to meet the targets of the plan. The fact is, if we have some wiggle room to both achieve those targets and begin the process of lowering the cost of living for all individuals in this country and the cost of doing business in this country, then we should do that, and we have done that. So we are seeking to strike the right balance. Lowering the cost of living, Mr. Speaker, provides relief to people who are struggling and increases the possibility that consumption will improve, and therefore the multiplier effect across the economy will be even more positive. Lowering the cost of doing business is critical in a number of ways as well, Mr. Speaker. This is particularly so for small businesses. The statistics show that small businesses account for in excess of 60% of the economy, Mr. Speaker. So it is imperative to support those, and that is what we are doing. These measures to relieve the cost of doing business, allows businesses to lower the cost of their goods and services, to be more competitive, and therefore grow. Of course, lowering the cost, their costs to the public, has the added benefit of lowering the cost of living generally. If they grow, they will at some point maximize the productivity of their existing employees, and they have to create additional jobs and hire additional people. That is a very positive benefit. That lowers unemployment in the country. For some, these cost reductions may be a lifeline to keep them going, to keep people hired, to keep families living, for families being provided. So, Mr. Speaker, people should in fact be happy that we have a significant projected surplus. It helps this country to regain our fiscal health very quickly, and it enables us to take positive steps of rolling back a lot of the choking fee increases of the last few years. It would be absolutely imprudent for us, Mr. Speaker, to squander those benefits that a surplus budget provides at this point. Now, in years to come, that may well change. We may be in a much stronger position, and therefore we'd be in a much better position to lower costs overall, reduce revenues, and give back more. The rationalization review that is being undertaken, Mr. Speaker, will also likely result in structural reforms within government, which should significantly lower over time the costs of government. I say over time deliberately, because while I think there are possibly and very likely quick wins, I think it's certainly the case that any such initiative has to be managed carefully over a period of time to ensure that decisions which are made leave relevant entities created in a viable state and effective in continuing to provide the services that are needed at a reasonable cost. I say all of that, Mr. Speaker, to indicate that we should not expect very substantial or significant declines in the cost of living at any one point in time. But rather, I think it will likely be a process of incremental reductions over time. The combination of a growing economy, more jobs, higher levels of pay, plus reductions in the cost of living is a recipe for a strong economy, strong country, and a stronger society. And I think, Mr. Speaker, beg your pardon, our current trajectory and plans are pointing us towards that reality. And this budget, I think, is an integral link in that process. Mr. Speaker, at this point, I would also add that there are certain initiatives that this government is contemplating. In the progress report, there is a reference to an MOU with a company called Navasoto. There are also other potential sources for alternate fuels which have significant potential to drive down the cost of electricity in this country. If we can implement something like that, if we can, for example, convert from burning the diesel fuel that we burn today to natural gas or propane, for example, those are cleaner fuels, cheaper fuels, and based on the experiences of utility companies in other parts of the region, those could account for up to 10 cents per kilowatt hour reduction in costs. So those are things that we as a government are seeking ways to engage in solutions to have that done through the local power company and anyone who is responding through the recent RFPs for power production. Getting on to ministry specifics, Mr. Speaker, in his budget address, I'm pleased that the Honourable Premier highlighted the importance of financial services as a pillar of our economy. I'd like to take it a step further by telling the people of this country how important financial services are, as well as discussing the connection between financial services, commerce, and the environment. There's a clear symbiosis there, Mr. Speaker. This progressive-led government has made great strides in developing this 14-15 budget with the incentives and measures that should make it easier for everyone to pay their bills and have an improved quality of life. Yet I'm unsure, Mr. Speaker, that enough of the public understand how financial services, for example, has made a lot of these measures possible. There was a survey done in 2011, Mr. Speaker, in which the then Financial Services Secretariat, which has undergone a name change, asked 3 questions to determine if people knew how much the financial services industry alone contributed to their quality of life. Now, Mr. Speaker, it was a fairly small survey, but the results were clear and indicative. Our people are generally less likely to know that financial services contributes over 50%, or around 50% at the very least, to public revenues. The direct contribution from the ministry alone is roughly about 40%. But of course, this increases once you account for all of the indirect contributions, including work permits and things like custom duties, etc. This revenue, Mr. Speaker, is obviously a very major contribution to government's ability to fund public services and social programs, scholarships, those very important aspects of services that government provides. Take away the contribution from financial services, and every household in Cayman has, including government, has far greater difficulty. Mr. Speaker, in light of this, I'd like to gently suggest that we need to reassess the level of government funding for financial services and increase it. I think it's shy of where it should be when we compare the efforts and the contributions of our competitors, the governments of our competitors, who are investing significantly more. We have been very successful, and I think we can achieve this, and we must continue to be vigilant to maintain, to grow our market share and to protect our market-leading position. But I think certainly in future budgets, we will need to pay more attention to that which is invested in relation to the financial services. We are always going to have the costs associated with regulation, but our competitors have those costs as well. I think, Mr. Speaker, given the circumstances, the current budget allocation reflects the best position that we could put ourselves in the circumstances, while trying to stay within the plan that we have agreed with the UK. We are prioritizing, as the Premier has said. Now, in saying that, I want to be clear that my interest is purely in protecting the value of the industry. I think we have to continue to refine our budgeting process so that it allows for greater prioritization, and in this case, some rebalancing, as I've said. Mr. Speaker, allow me at this time to say clearly what improving the spending in relation to financial services can do for us. It will provide a stronger, broader, deeper financial base, which with careful guidance will continue to provide steady and sustainable revenue and substantial contribution to this economy. Mr. Speaker, I've already outlined, I think, and I will not go into it further, how financial services is a primary driver of the economy. But it is also a significant component of my other area of responsibility, which is commerce. This includes the systems and framework for financial services and other areas, including tourism, for example. The key distinction to be made regarding tourism is that my ministry focuses on the businesses that support our tourism product, while the Ministry of Tourism focuses more on attracting visitors and providing exemplary tourism experience. As I mentioned earlier, there is a connection between financial services, commerce, and the environment. I think everyone will recall the discussions we had with the National Conservation Law. And there is the clear link between the conservation and preservation of our environment and the value that that has to our tourism product. There's also the very clear link that that has in relation to our quality of life as citizens and residents of this country. I think In today's world, there is another connection in that globally there is such a significant focus on the environment that the way we treat our environment is actually a reflection of how we're respected internationally as well. That may well have an influence in relation to our reputation as an international financial center. Where we're at, I think, reflects the fact that we have the right balance. Much like we want our children to develop into being well-rounded individuals who perhaps excel in one area, but do well across the board. International civic societies like to do business either through tourism, financial services, or what have you, with countries that appreciate and respect their own environments. While I mention respecting ourselves, Mr. Speaker, permit me to digress for a moment on an issue of real concern, and that is the amount of littering that we see every day in this country. It is a huge issue and one which impacts not only our quality of life, but the quality of our tourism product as well. It is nothing short of disgusting, Mr. Speaker, to see the numbers of beer bottles that are discarded along our roadsides, aluminum cans, other trash, fast food bags. This is indicative to me of another problem in terms of the beer bottles: too much drinking and driving. I want to appeal to our citizens and residents to be more responsible, to have pride in themselves and the country, and to show respect for both, to respecting the environment. I want to appeal to them to cease the unsightly littering and dumping that goes on. Moving back to my original track, Mr. Speaker, there is a growing recognition that a country's gross domestic product, which is commonly used as an indicator of the economic health of a country and to gauge a country's standard of living, is an incomplete measure of the actual well-being of its citizens. Increasingly, organizations like the World Bank are linking the state of a country's natural resource base or natural capital with long-term economic sustainability. As a small nation, Mr. Speaker, with a fragile natural resource base, it is imperative that Cayman understands the very tight links between the health of our natural environment and our economy. And I'm delighted that the Department of Environment is beginning to produce data and information that will assist government in this regard. I'll speak more about that subsequently. In relation to each area of my ministry, to provide some background on the budget that is before the House, Mr. Speaker, first in relation to financial services. Persons who are keeping abreast of developments in financial services will have noticed an important shift in Cayman's global reputation. This has been decades in coming, and as a jurisdiction, we are just now welcoming the evidence of the fruits of our labors. That is not to say that we can relax or let down our guard. We still have a long ways to go. There are many non-governmental organizations and misguided national and supranational agendas out there that will continue to attack our credibility. Mr. Speaker, Cayman has long engaged in the Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information for Tax Purposes. And for the past few years, we have retained our seats on the OECD Global Forum Steering Group and its peer review group. Last year, we were named for the first time as one of the peer review group's vice chairs. For those who are unfamiliar with the Global Forum, it is more than 120 member jurisdictions which form the brain center, let's call it, for international tax and transparency issues. In addition to being the preeminent tax body, the forum ensures maximum engagement in the rapidly developing and expanding world of international tax cooperation. And it is responsible for monitoring and assessing, Mr. Speaker, all countries against acceptable international standards. The direction and tone of how international tax cooperation is implemented and evaluated is a hallmark of this forum's work. And it ensures that initiatives that are globally developed are globally practiced. The positions we hold on the Global Forum groups, Mr. Speaker, are unmistakable honors. They indicate that we have proven ourselves to be knowledgeable enough, trustworthy enough, unbiased enough to contribute to the forum's work and the governance thereof. Cayman is among more than 50 countries that have committed to become early adopters of the new standard for automatic exchange of information for tax and transparency purposes. People in Cayman are no doubt familiar with the U.S. Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act intergovernmental agreement, which was signed with the United States, and what's referred to as the FATCA type agreement, which has been entered into with the United Kingdom. This jurisdiction is no stranger to automatic exchange of information, Mr. Speaker. Having successfully operated under those requirements of the European Union Savings Directive with 28 EU countries over the last 9 years. All of this places us in a good position to handle the extensive new obligations which result from the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act and the new international requirements of the common reporting standards published by the OECD and endorsed by the G20 leaders. This is a new norm for tax cooperation and transparency, Mr. Speaker. And I'm pleased to note that Cayman is a member of the Global Forum's Automatic Exchange of Information group that is handling the implementation of the new standard, as well as an observer to the OECD's working party that is responsible for setting the standard. Mr. Speaker, we've certainly been pleased to be recognized with that space at the table. Today, I am pleased to announce that as a result of the diligence of the Ministry's Department of Financial Services Policy and Legislation, formerly the Financial Services Secretariat, we have recently confirmed an exchange of information relationship with Colombia. The result of that, Mr. Speaker, is that Colombia is removing the Cayman Islands from its blacklist of tax havens. Now, there are other South American countries that have similar lists, and we're very hopeful that this will assist in achieving that end result in relation to those lists as well. And this comes about through the extension to Cayman of the Convention on Mutual Assistance in Tax Matters, the OECD Convention, which this government committed to last year, and as I said earlier, came into force the 1st of January. There are now 70 countries being recognized to effectively exchange information on an automatic basis for tax purposes, as well as on request, with the Cayman Islands. Now, Mr. Speaker, for the public, this is a compelling reason why we are so involved in the global tax and transparency initiatives. If we want to maintain the quality of life that benefits all Caymanians, then we must remain involved, we must remain engaged, we must continue to influence perspectives and correct untruths. These issues are of huge importance. We must continue to be well represented. And it is not a role that industry can take. These meetings are amongst government leaders and officials. So if we don't do it, who will speak for us? Mr. Speaker, I note that our work in financial services is global. And as such, it's worth speaking about what our competitor jurisdictions are doing. In this quickly changing landscape, they're researching and developing strategies in order to maintain and grow their financial services profile. They are, as I mentioned earlier, well funded as well. We are being outspent, but we are, despite that, continuing to be very successful. The concern is that we make sure that we don't lose our competitive edge and we don't lose our dominant position. For the coming year, Mr. Speaker, we are requesting a total of $1.3 million for the Department of Financial Services, Policy and Legislation, and for the Department for International Tax Cooperation. And for the record, that is the new name for what was formerly called the the Tax Information Authority. Department for International Tax Cooperation. That department encompasses all of the competent authority functions for tax matters performed by the authority, and also handles other tax-related issues, including our Global Forum involvement. Mr. Speaker, the renaming of those departments mentioned, Financial Services Secretariat to the Department of Financial Services Policy and Legislation, and the Tax Information Authority to the Department for International Tax Cooperation, is a part of the restructuring of the ministry in order to allow us to more effectively focus on their respective areas of responsibility. These two areas, or entities, I should say, are directly responsible for local and international financial services developments. And this 1.3 million budget allocation will fund our continuing engagement with our local financial services industry and with the global bodies such as the Global Forum. These functions, Mr. Speaker, are now more important than ever in order for the ministry to maintain and enhance financial services as a pillar of our economy. I consider it, Mr. Speaker, moving on, to be a privilege to also have responsibility for commerce. It has a similarly broad reach and importance for Cayman. In particular, I'm interested and dedicated to this because of the focus on small businesses, as I mentioned earlier in my initial contribution. This is primarily a local activity. For academics and practitioners, Mr. Speaker, it is a given that countries without strong small business environments weaken their economies. Now, researchers also agree that when inward investment is brought into a country, it provides overall stability as well. It does so in three ways. It protects against shocks caused by global economic disruptions, creates short and long-term employment, and puts more money into circulation. In Cayman, the Department of Commerce and Investment, the DCI, oversees small businesses and investment services. The small business support aspect in this budget is very important, obviously, to the country, very important, therefore, to the DCI. We are starting with ways to minimize the revenue impact on government, yet provide tangible benefits to small businesses. The discounts of trade and business fees, Mr. Speaker, are designed to increase as you move away from the traditional centers of business in Georgetown and West Bay, to encourage the businesses relocating in other districts, and obviously, of course, to support those existing businesses that exist in the districts further away from the current centers of commerce. There are other proposals which we are working on, Mr. Speaker, which will require the cooperation of other ministries and perhaps a change in laws to facilitate them. But similar principles, Mr. Speaker, will be used or utilized in terms of trying to provide tangible benefits, but at the same time minimizing the impacts on revenue. Of course, I'm speaking specifically of the move to have fees paid rather than in one lump sum, paid on a quarterly basis, for example. It helps the cash flow of businesses, yet it has little specific impact on government's cash position and its revenue overall. There is one element in relation to an authority which is under my ministry, that is the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority, through which we will seek to encourage them to adopt the same approach, to support businesses that are licensed by the Monetary Authority, but that are small businesses, but yet are not, specifically not a part of the financial services industry. Because I think we want to focus our efforts, certainly at this point, in trying to help those small businesses that don't have access to the larger international markets, but are trying to survive, trying to grow, trying to maintain themselves in the domestic economy. Mr. Speaker, to better serve the public, DCI staff revamped the trade and business filing systems, which has cut down on the time it takes to save and retrieve files. This is very significant for commerce because no one, especially small business owners, has enough time in the day to work at making their business, has enough hours, I should say, in the day to work at making their business a success. They always need more time. The less time they spend in a line, the more efficient we can make the process, the better off they will be, the more successful they have an opportunity to be. Staff also improved the workflow, Mr. Speaker, with Cayman Enterprise City to expedite application processes and create a new due diligence process for the special economic zone and the local companies control law license applicants. The public, Mr. Speaker, will be glad to know that this improvement gives the relevant boards more information in approving fit and proper persons to operate businesses in the Cayman Islands. They're also continuing to review the liquor licensing law and are working on a new trade and business licensing law that will be merged with the local companies control law. At the same time, we'll be looking to address some of the loopholes that my colleague, the 5th elected member from Georgetown, mentioned in his contribution yesterday. In relation to the liquor licensing law, Mr. Speaker, we have been reviewing, we have a committee that was established which has been reviewing that law and proposing amendments to the law. In addition, they were charged with assessing the position in relation to the existing moratorium which is set out in the existing law and making recommendations as to the approach that government should take in relation to that. The recommendation that has been made, Mr. Speaker, is that the existing moratorium should be lifted. One of the reasons for that is, and a very significant reason for that, is the black market which essentially exists at this point in relation to these licenses, and I refer to it as the black market simply because that is how it is typically described in the business community, where licenses are being offered for sale at very substantial values, and in some cases, many cases, they are being essentially rented for significant sums of money as well. I think one of the issues there is that the government gets absolutely no benefit from this. It doesn't limit the numbers of restaurants and bars that are serving the public because there are quite a number of these licenses out there. So the recommendation, Mr. Speaker, is that this moratorium be lifted, and that is a recommendation which the Cabinet will be considering in the coming month. Another initiative, which was mentioned by the Premier, Mr. Speaker, is the consideration of the Sunday trading law and whether we should engage in a process of consultation. I think our determination has been that we will engage in a public consultation on this issue to essentially get the feedback of the public of the country. It is clearly a sensitive issue, and that has to be respected. I think our traditional Christian values have to be respected. But equally, there are a number of competing factors which suggest that it is something that we should consider and we should engage the public in discussing. Of course, the government will, having gone through the consultation process, make a decision on the basis of the preponderance of views. There's also an initiative in relation to the conversion of the country to daylight savings, Mr. Speaker. And this is something that has been discussed for many years, and the Chamber of Commerce in particular has advocated quite strongly for many years for the introduction of daylight savings to bring this country in line with its major trading partner, which is the United States. So that is another initiative that we will be having discussions on, and the Cabinet will be considering as a proposal for discussion from my ministry, from the DCI in particular. Mr. Speaker, the DCI has done a lot of work with a reduced level of staffing. I have to congratulate them for the efforts they have made and the work they have done. They have 2 posts for liquor licensing for 357 establishments. 1 person for enforcement for 4,500 businesses, and 3 staff members on trade and business licensing, which sees 400 applications per month, around 70 of which, Mr. Speaker, are new grants. If this budget is approved, they will be able to hire 3 new staff to better serve the country and to reduce the levels of stress and work that the existing staff have to cope with. DCI, Mr. Speaker, also has responsibility for guiding investors through the business establishment process by providing information on incentives, legislation, or current regulatory requirements and the steps required to accomplish these. I have not said anything in relation to posts for that area because unfortunately we have none at the moment. It has been an area that has unfortunately been a victim of the budget cuts which we have been mandated to provide. But we are making that up by being more engaged at a ministry level and available to discuss the needs and interests with potential investors. And I know that there are other ministries, including, for example, the Ministry of Planning and the Ministry of Tourism, which can and do assist in this area. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, it's probably fair to say that it is not ideal, but I will be seeking in the next budget to deepen our capability and performance in this area. In addition to DCI, Mr. Speaker, a core department is also the General Registry, which performs the critical functions of registering business and generating significant revenue collection. The registry continues to pursue initiatives that will enhance services available to the financial services sector and the wider community. One such initiative will be introduced later this year, Mr. Speaker, with the implementation of modernized intellectual property legislation. This legislation will provide for direct registration of trademarks in the Cayman Islands. Currently, the process involves registration in the United Kingdom and application for extension to the Cayman Islands. The benefit, obviously, is that we do not need to pre-register the UK and will not have to deal with the Madrid Protocol. It would also enhance the attractiveness of the jurisdiction to global players, Mr. Speaker, in the field of research and development, who may be interested in relocating to the Cayman Islands. I think this represents an excellent investment for us and should generate significant revenues. I think we're looking at somewhere around anticipated $5 to $7 million in the next 3 to 4 years. In this budget year, or the coming budget year, Mr. Speaker, General Registry plans to expand its online services, which now includes the company's register, to include a register for partnerships. It's also budgeted for the conversion of the existing manual records for partnerships to an electronic format in an ongoing effort to increase efficiencies and manage storage and other associated costs. I'm pleased to say, Mr. Speaker, that the registry's introduction of online transactions now boasts more than 900 active users.
Honorable Minister, is this a convenient time to take the luncheon break? Are you close to finish?
No, sir. I probably have a little bit longer. So this would be a convenient time.
This Honorable House now suspends until 1:45 p.m.
Douglas had told Steve Harvey, you are not the shortest man I know.